Let me know when it's on. I can't see it on my side that it's on yet.
Should be, okay, we're good to go now.
Okay, great, fantastic. Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody who's here and joined us for this afternoon session. Today we have an amazing speaker. This is the second time that Temi's joining us to do a webinar for our women audiences. Last year was, again, very enlightening, really riveting presentations around government relations and trade and all the things that she has incredible expertise on. She's a remarkable woman. She's a leader. She's a mover and a shaker. She works around the world. She's working with governments. She's dealing with public policy. Am I on mute? No. And we're really delighted to have her here again. I just want to just remind everybody again, please put your questions in the chat. And we want to make sure that we capture your questions. There'll be sections where we will stop to take your questions. We're going to be recording for an hour. And I know there's a lot of information that Temi is going to cover in that time, including trade agreements, business ethics, and how we can really take our businesses global. As we set on a global mindset and growth mindset, we want to make sure that our businesses grow beyond the countries that we're currently trading in. So I know this is going to be really exciting. I'm going to hand over to Mikhail to introduce himself and then to introduce our amazing speaker for us for this afternoon. Mikhail, over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Mikhail, managing purchases at P&G South Africa, and luckily part of Sub-Saharan Africa as well. Really happy to be part of the partnership with WeConnect, and great that we can do this for the second year in a row. And great to have Toby on as well for the second year in a row. And with that, Toby, I will hand over to you to get started.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Okay, great. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, as I believe we have people joining from all over the world. My name is Tope Iluyemi, and it's really an honor to be back a second time to share with you the principles of international trade and ethics as you look at expanding your business either regionally or globally. So just a brief background about me. I've been in Procter & Gamble about 23 years. I qualified as a pharmacist, and I've been able to use my multiple skills both in P&G as well as elsewhere before I joined P&G. I have broad experience in P&G, across sales, the supply chain, external relations, and then government relations. And I also work across several governments, so between the US, being a US company, as well as the African governments, to promote trade and investment across Africa, and also help to improve the ease of doing business from between all our countries. So regional integration has been a key passion of mine. I also sit on a number of boards, including P&G Nigeria, and Corporate Council on Africa, as well as Montserrado Holdings in Netherlands. So it's really a pleasure to be with you today. I look forward to seeing you all in person when conditions actually do permit. Now, like I said, we're going to be talking about global trade mostly. Many people actually perceive that expanding globally or regionally does carry risks. But then I say everything in life carries risks. As you've started your business now, I'm sure it took a lot of effort and overcoming these risks to be able to actually have a domestic business. It's really no different from getting an international business, because there are lots of opportunities for you to grow and expand. And as we go into today's presentation, you will see some of the tools that we can utilize as we plan to expand our businesses internationally. So the aim of this course is to provide you with those tools that can help you in the expansion thinking or strategies. So we'll talk about what you need to consider before you expand, a bit on international trade concepts. We'll go into the free trade agreements, how you can utilize them, some of them which are Africa specific, which one is recently coming on, which you need to know about if you plan to expand your business, and then also a little bit about ethics and how that affects your business. We say it is really your only currency that matters. It doesn't, you can't value your reputation. You can't put a dollar tag on your reputation. It's really important. Before we go into all that, a little bit about the theory of, since we're talking about going global or going regional. So when we talk about what is globalization, so it's really how the interdependency and the linkages between regional economies, societies, and cultures, and having them integrated into a global network of trade, of communication, immigration, transportation, as well as the like. And it can be a material globalization or immaterial. Material being some of the concrete items, in terms of goods and services moving, and immaterial, for instance, when you talk about financial markets and equities, which you can trade between regions without actually physically being there. And some of the things that drive globalization, include advancement in technologies, where today we see globalization increasing because of, when we had the internet versus in the 60s when it wasn't. Today, there's better connectivity also between countries. And then you also have reduction in cross-border trade barriers. You see a number of trade agreements coming on, either bilateral or multilateral trade agreements, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. There's increase in consumer demand for, different types of products that are not necessarily available within your own domestic market. This is also spurred on by the advancements in technology. So we know what is happening in Israel, we know what is available in New York, and consumers want to continue to up and increase their stake in in consumption of these products and services. Of course, with that also comes increased competition, and we have to respond to this, and it also helps us to improve our standards. Now, what does going global entail? What does going global entail? Okay, like I said, every business venture has its risks, okay? But there are some things that can help you to mitigate or minimize those risks as you work on going global. So for instance, you will need to change your business strategy by understanding what is actually needed in the countries or the regions that you plan to expand into. What is important? You have to do your research before going into those countries. Don't assume that because maybe you're in the same region that the needs in your country and the next country is going to be the same, no matter how obvious it may seem that, oh, this is a fantastic product. You start by assessing the landscape, and I share examples from what I have done here at P&G when we're expanding the business in West Africa, for instance, and as well as in East Africa. We had our business headquarters, let's say in Nigeria or in Kenya, so we settled in the big countries, and then we start to expand into these surrounding countries in order to grow our business. So you conduct what we call two types of research. So there's the primary research as well as the secondary research. Primary research, obviously, there's a lot of information available to you out there on the internet where you can gather information about your product, the particular market, the politics, the business environment. You can check about their ease of doing business, what is required to set up a business in that country, whether some language limitations exist, your labeling criteria, all types of regulatory considerations that you need to get into. You can check various sources, so the ministries of trade, the investment promotion authorities in those different countries. They're usually very helpful and willing to give you information that is needed. One thing you need to be careful about, though, as you do all the primary investigation, what it does is it gives you information that prepares you for deeper engagement into that country. So it actually helps you to think about what are the other bits and pieces that I'm missing. What am I not getting from the online information that I'm getting? So the World Bank, the embassies in those countries also have commercial departments where they provide you this information. Then there's the secondary check. So after you've developed this huge either Excel or document about all the landscape information that enables you to access that market, you also want to then do your secondary check. Why this is important is what I've found out in many countries is what is actually written down in terms of the policy can sometimes vary in execution or interpretation. So you need to go to the right source and actually ensure that your understanding from the little research that you've done also equates with the actual execution on ground. So because you don't want to overinvest in something where the actual intent of the people in those countries is actually, it's actually nominal. But then you also want to dig further to ensure that what looks like a simple statement does not go deeper and does not have bigger requirements. So we go into the market, we talk to customers, you invest, you attend trade shows, and then you do a lot of work that actually enables you to assess your own business strategy, which market actually does meet your own objectives much better, and then where it is easiest to actually start your business. Definitely it is easier to operate in some countries than others. That is never a deterrent. It's actually all dependent on your own business objectives, your strategy. What exactly are you aiming to get from those countries? Culture is obviously very important. You need to understand the cultural norms in any country that you want to go into. In fact, I tell people, if you take nothing away from this training, which is to aid you to expand regionally, you take away this piece, that understanding the culture of the country or region that you're going into is one of the most important lessons that you need to have before you actually expand into those countries, beyond all the other legal ramifications. Okay, and I say here also, once you've done your research, when you're talking to consumers and customers, you need to understand what we call the first and second, the zero first and second moments of truth. Zero moments of truth is probably what we're talking about now. It's the planning stage, is the research stage, is the setting strategy stage, and then you getting all the right information, designing your product, your product or services which you will take into those countries. And then once you have launched, you have the first moment of truth, which is where the consumer actually then has the opportunity to pick your product from the shelf. So this is basically, how do you, if we're talking from a product standpoint, so how do you look on the shelf? How do I pick your product from the array of similar goods on the shelf? What makes you stand out? And then the second moment of truth is when the consumer actually uses your product and they are convinced of the properties of your product as well as the value that it does give to them, that then gingers them to repurchase your product. So you want to win at all these stages of truth. If you miss out on zero, your first probably won't be chosen off shelf. And if you are not chosen off the shelf, you're unlikely to have a second moment of truth, which then leads to repurchase. Then the other thing to look into is also ensuring that in today's world, advertising is evolving and is changing. And I'm sure if you've attended a number of the series, you will hear a lot more about that from our marketing experts. But you want to understand, what are the digital regulations in the country that you're going into, what can be said online, what cannot be used online, and you want to ensure that you use the most effective method of advertising your product in any specific country. Of course, you can always get help. There are lots of marketing and advertising companies in each of those countries, because no matter how much of an expert you are, you always need local knowledge, local insights to ensure that whatever you put out there is relevant, is not offensive, and it actually does achieve the objective that you want it to achieve. So what do we say? One of the important things is to ensure that what you put out there is also truthful. Never make claims that cannot be substantiated or that your consumers will find to be false. It's very difficult to recover from those types of errors. So like I said, you can always get companies to help you, get the best out of digital engagements and marketing, and to improve your visibility. The most important thing here is to keep an eye on your customer, understand who your customer is, understand what their needs are, and ensure that the product or service that you are providing actually does address this need. Now, I want to show you an example of what I mean when I say you need to understand the cultural norms of the countries that you're going into. So it's online, but normally I would throw this at the class as a case study. And this was a case of Nike in the early 90s, where they launched Nike Air in the Middle East, and what happened. So in the meantime, let me show you this video. It's a text video, so you'll see the story actually scrolling on the screen. So this was a costly mistake that Nike made, and this was just born out of not understanding the culture and the norms in the markets where they were planning to expand to. So in 1997, they launched Nike Air in the Middle East, and they had this signal on the shoes which represented Allah, which some people found offensive in those countries. And as a result, Nike had to recall all those shoes in the market. Now, this is costly, but more importantly is the reputational risk that you run by not doing the homework correctly in the first case. Nike obviously has been able to come round and rebound and build a strong brand even in those markets today. But imagine if it was a smaller company without the kind of resources that Nike had. Recalling thousands or even millions of your product from the market can actually signify the end of that business. So please, this part of it is really very important, where you study, you research, you plan, you understand, and you get into the country to understand what obtains, what works well with your consumers or what doesn't. Okay. Now I'm going to go a little bit now into more about international trade concepts, what it is, what are the things that you need to understand. So essentially, what is international trade is just the exchange of goods and services across borders. So there are three parts: the import, export, and entreport. Import and export, I believe most of you understand, goods going into a country or goods being taken out of the country. Entreport is less common. It involves, bringing goods into one country, adding value into it. So for instance, some people import like big bags of certain products. Let's say detergent, for instance. You can import bulk powder into the country, and then when you get into the country, you add value to it. Maybe you add some enzymes, you add some oils, and then you repackage them into consumer packets, which then goes onto the shelf, and then maybe you then export them into another country. The fact that you've been able to add value to it in that country can then qualify you for export of that finished goods in a different form, obviously with a different code as well, into another country. Many countries actually welcome this service in the absence of full-scale manufacturing, because it cuts out some parts of the chain, but it still brings part of the production process into that country. Now, what determines the need for international trade, or in your own case, what determines your consideration? What are the things you need to consider as you expand into other countries? So price, for instance, can you provide your goods at a better price than similar goods in the same market that you're expanding into? So if you have that advantage in your country, either because you have access to, you have a comparative advantage in sourcing raw materials from your country, which then makes your products cheaper, and then you can export into another country, that gives you an advantage. Can you provide these goods or services at a better quality than the next country, then that would attract your goods or services into the other country. Availability is another thing. Where there's a shortage of that particular product in the surrounding countries, then there creates room for expansion into those countries. You have to be very careful that you're not trying to get goods that is already clogged, that already has a glut in a particular market, and then try and bring in the same item, unless you have a differentiating factor that can actually help you rise through the clutter of that particular sector. So countries also use this to bridge the availability gap in their countries. Let's say petroleum, for instance, if you're oil producing countries, for instance, let's say the US, they don't have enough, they import oil from other countries just to meet the local needs and to fill the gap. Obviously, demand is an obvious one. If there's a demand for your goods and services in the next country, then it's very highly likely to fly. I like to use the example here of the Nigerian fashion industry. When I go around Africa, a number of people ask me for our dresses, our Ankara dresses. So there is obviously a market for it out there. But again, you have to understand that it's not necessarily going to be used in the same way that we design it in Nigeria. So you still need to understand when we say there's a demand for Nigerian fashion in these countries, in what format? How does that also address their own national dress, for instance? So even though it is these prints, it needs to also ensure that it fits into their own culture and their own specific country. So then the next thing I want to talk about is trade agreements, and then go into how you utilize those. So for instance, some countries have entered into international trade agreements that can govern that, these trade agreements govern the movement of goods and services across borders using international conventions. I have the picture here of a woman I'm very proud of, whom I'm sure most of you have either know or heard about, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who recently became the first African and woman DG of the World Trade Organization. So we're hoping that with her there, we will see more trade between Africa and the rest of the world, and we can smoothen a lot of the rough edges of some of the trade wars that exist. So we need to understand some of the conventions that govern the movement of goods and services. You need to understand that the laws that govern the movement of goods and services between countries can differ from what you have domestically. It can be simpler, it can also be a lot tougher. The important thing is that we find out what applies and take this into account before we sign any form of contract. Now, there are two types of trade programs. Essentially, you have what you call preference programs, which actually is an agreement that gives advantage to another country, usually maybe a least developed country, that enables them to export products into another country without having to pay duty in those countries. So it's a program that gives preferential treatment to specific countries or specific products going into another country. Such programs include programs like AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. Is essentially a produce agreement between the United States and the countries of Africa, where you can import goods into the US, African products for produce of specified quantity and standards into the US without all the duties attached to it. There's also the generalized the GSP program as well, which enables the easier movement of goods between several countries. The second one is also bilateral and multilateral agreements. This is an agreement that is between either two parties or multiple countries. It's a lot more complex than the preferential programs. It involves more parties. It has a lot more stringent rules, like your rules of origin, which can be complex in computing, but it offers huge opportunities to entrepreneurs who know how to leverage these programs. Examples of these trade agreements include things like the free trade agreements in ECOWAS, in SADC, in the COMESA, or NAFTA if you start to go beyond the African region. So these are some of the trade agreements that you need to familiarize yourself with before you choose to expand your products beyond your domestic market. You need to also understand how does this affect sourcing of materials if you're into production, for instance. I'll give an example. Like for P&G, we have located our plants within specific free trade areas to enable us to optimize and access the benefits that are inherent within that zone. So for instance, we have manufacturing sites in Lagos to serve the ECOWAS region. We have manufacturing sites in South Africa to serve the SADC region, at the best value possible. And then we also operate COMESA, through COMESA, which is an agreement covering about 26 countries in Africa that enables, a much easier movement of goods and services between the countries that have a free trade agreement with COMESA. In these trade agreements, you also need to understand that there are different stages of the agreements, as you move on. So you have the free trade areas, which in many cases is about the starting point, and then these then deepen and evolve into things like common markets, customs union, and then ultimately into a complete free market, which it's arguable whether it's ever actually really free or it exists completely. I think it's in batches that this exists. Talking about trade agreements, just to also give you briefly the type of trade agreements that exist in Africa. We have lots of trade agreements in Africa, either bilaterals or multilaterals between, starting from 2 countries up to, even 34 countries in Africa. What you do is you try to leverage the best form of sourcing within the free trade area where you want to operate, and so that you can access all the benefits within that particular region. So if you can see this map where we have ECOWAS and 15 countries, you have in the north of Africa as well, you have the AMU, they have some agreements with the Middle East as well. Some of these, you have the EAC, which is working quite well among the East African community of about 5 countries. And then you have COMESA, which has, like I said, 26 countries and goes all the way from East or Southern Africa all the way to Egypt. Now, this has been the landscape in Africa over a number of years. And that despite all these small areas of free trade across the continent, trading within or among African countries was actually quite limited. We're trading at about 12% or 16% among ourselves, but we're having a lot higher trade interaction with countries in Europe or in the US or in India and China. But we all know that African prosperity actually does reside in Africa. So the governments of Africa put themselves together. Actually, it's been a journey, and they put together what we call the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which I will go a little bit more into that. Before I go into it, you all know that January 1, there were 2 major integration decisions that happened in the world. There was Brexit, where Britain, after many years of being part of the EU, decided that they were not going to be part of that anymore. And also on January 1st this year, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area also went live, where it's been a long journey over the years, but the start of trade was formally kicked off in January by the heads of states in Africa after a long journey. And just to tell you about the journey, it started way back in 1991, several treaties, several agreements that were shared, several conversations, several negotiations going on to arrive at where we are today. It's usually a long process, but it picked up pace since about 2017, where the governments or the heads of states of African countries decided, to come together and actually implement this as part of the African Union 2063 roadmap. And this has culminated. So you have countries sign the agreement, and then they ratify to trade, and then on January 1st, this kicked off. But with some caveats as well. There are many benefits to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Like I said, for Africa to develop, Africans need to trade more within itself. We should be able to utilize the materials from one country in another, and then be able to have finished goods from one country also moving across to other countries. For us as a company, we see this as a huge advantage to both entrepreneurs as well as bigger companies to expand their reach across Africa and also offer the best value to our consumers. So there are 55 states or countries in Africa. As of now, 54 out of those 55 countries have signed the ACFTA agreement. I think the only country outstanding is Eritrea. And but what this does is it opens up the market to a population of over 1.2 billion people versus the little agreements that we have between 4 or 5 countries out of 55. There's an estimate that boosting this intra-Africa trade will increase the trade between African countries by over 52%, enabling more African countries to benefit from the gains of integration within Africa. And then also we expect that it will cover a GDP of 3.4 trillion across the African market. The other advantage is that for other countries to trade with Africa, it is actually much more beneficial to us to negotiate as a big bloc of 1.2 billion people versus maybe a country of 5 or 6 or 10 million people trying to get advantage from Big Brother in Europe or in America. So like I said, the agreement came in force in January 2021. The execution, we're going into the execution phase because the actual trading, the exchange and movement of goods under ACFTA itself has not commenced because there's some final details that are being completed among the different countries. But the AU expect that by July this year, we should be able to actually start trading using the ACFTA. The protocol required us to have 22 countries ratify for it to go live. As of the last count that I checked, 34 countries had ratified the instruments to go into to actually trade. One important thing for you to know is what I call the 90-73 rule of the ACFTA. In the ACFTA agreement, 90% of goods in Africa will be liberalized. 7% fall under sensitive goods, which will be liberalized over time, and 3% of tariff lines will fall under the exclusion list. Now, what this means is that anything that falls under the exclusion list cannot be traded under the ACFTA, so it will not qualify for free trade. So you need to check, before you launch your goods or services into any country, make sure you do check where your product falls in any particular country. Also bear in mind, the exclusion list also differs from one country to the other. So the exclusion list, if it exists in South Africa, will be different from the exclusion, likely be different from the exclusion list in Kenya. So these are all country driven. The African Union has done a lot of work, also created, an online portal to ensure that you can report, where you come across what we call non-tariff barriers, and then you need to engage with the various agencies in your country to understand the actual process to register for an ACFTA certificate and then qualify to export your goods across the different countries at zero duty. In the meantime, this agreement is actually going to progress in a gradual phase. So for instance, for big countries, over a period of 5 years, the goods will be liberalized over a period of 5 years. So you won't get zero duty from day one. You will get the duty incrementally reduced over the period of 5 years. So if duty today is 20%, you get it at 16% in year 1, 12% in year 2, until it gets to zero. So again, it is important to understand what obtains in the different countries. I don't know if this will play. It's actually talking about the benefits of the ACFTA. I'm going to try if yes, it's actually going to play. Please tell me if you can see my screen.
We can't, Toby. It's still the slide.
Sorry?
It's still just a slide. I'm not sure if you had opened the internet link, but we still just see your presentation.
Okay. I have opened the internet link. Like I said, I'm not sure if it will play, but it's basically a speech given by Dr. Carlos Lopez from the University of Cape Town on the benefits of ACFTA, many of which are the things that I have just shared in terms of having access to a much larger market, and also the benefits of dealing through a much bigger block than individual countries. So I will send you the link in the presentation so you can watch this later.
Yeah, I'll also put it into the chat. I've got your slides, so I'll copy that link into the chat for those who want it sooner. Thanks.
Good. So I have actually said a lot around what is international trade, what are trade agreements, what you need to look out for in opening up your businesses in international or regional markets, how you can utilize the free trade agreement, and then also zoning in specifically on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. At this point, I want to know if there are any questions.
Yes, there are some questions that came through. One of them was, how do you work out or forecast the import duties? And this is because of an experience where they were surprised on duties on arrival in Europe.
Okay. Thank you for that. So remember, I talked about doing extensive research before you actually decide to export your goods to any country. And I've also, what I have seen from experience is that sometimes what is actually stated on paper, the interpretation and its execution can sometimes differ. That is why we then recommend a secondary research. So if you do your in-depth research, you should have the information as to what is the full levies that accrue to a particular category or a product. Sometimes when you look at the tariff, they just tell you the common external tariff. So like I talked about, duty rates in SADC is 20%. The common external tariff is 20%. But when you're going to import goods into, let's say Zambia, for instance, you want to also ensure that there are no national levies that are also included by the Zambian government that will take your duty beyond the 20%. This information is only available through research. And I really encourage that beyond the internet search that you do, try and also engage with the investment promotion authorities. They usually can give you this in-depth information. You can also use customs brokers in country on the ground. So people who are already exporting or importing into that country, they are probably one of the best sources of information in terms of what actually happens when it comes to execution. I hope that answers your question.
Great. And going on to the next question, it is, how cumbersome is it to register for ACFTA if you're a small business? And is this process small business friendly?
Okay, good question. The ACFTA is been long in coming, and we are yet to see the actual execution in practice. However, each country will lay out the process for accessing the ACFTA to be able to export using the ACFTA, because the African Union has taken a learning from the various FTAs that exist in Africa, so SADC, ECOWAS, COMESA. Hopefully, the intent is that the ACFTA will have captured all the issues that we had in all those other FTAs, thereby making this a lot smoother. So this information actually will be shared on a country-by-country basis. In South Africa, for instance, we're waiting for an announcement from DTI to tell us when the workshops, the sensitization workshops on how to access this will actually come up. So like I said, the African Union is driving to have execution, actual trading begin no later than July as the rules of origin is completed. So we can also share this information with you, as I will be attending the workshops whenever they are fixed for, and we can share back this information. But it is expected to be friendly, whether you're a small business or a big business. Once you're able to meet all the set criteria, you can get all the right documents together, you will be able to access the same duty-free incentives. So watch this space.
Great. Just the last one I'll touch on. You did mention exclusions across countries, and how does one get more information on these exclusions across countries?
Okay, another very good question. These are some of the things that we will get during the sensitization workshops that each Ministry of Trade and Investment will be holding in each country. Recall I said that the exclusion list is also country, it's dependent on each country. So each country will determine what are the items in its exclusion list. However, sometimes there are bilateral agreements between countries to actually enable them trade in what could be in the exclusion list between those countries. So maybe you exchange one thing for the other. But generally, these are available through your ministries of trade and investment in all the different countries, or you can again get them through your one-stop shop in the investment promotion centers or commissions in the different countries. So they will publish both the tariff rates as well as the exclusion list just before the start of trading.
Great, that's all the questions that we have for now.
Okay, thank you. Now that you've asked me your questions, now I have a question for you all, and I'd like you to type your responses into the chat box. Mikhail will help me with collating that as well. So we've talked about, going global and the things that, could, help you succeed when you expand regionally or globally. So now, out of these items, what do you think are the factors that can help you succeed the most in regional and international markets? So you have 1 to 4. I'll give you 1 minute to type that out. So what we should have had is a poll on this.
Yeah, poll would have been great. Yeah, there's a few coming through so far. Two seems to be, most people think 2, except for 1, 4, I think.
So what's the majority so far?
2s.
2s, okay. It's a trick question. So which of these factors most determines your success in regional and international markets? If you consider all the things that actually enable you to succeed in international markets, and what are the factors that actually drive that drive international trade? That's what you should be thinking about. So among the factors that drive international trade, which is most likely to stand you apart and make you successful?
There are a few more 4s that have come through, but it still seems to be a lot of 2s. A few 4s now starting to come through.
Okay. So apologies, next time we put this in a poll, it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, definitely we'll put it in a poll. I think continue, because I'm worried that you've got a lot of slides and we've got 15 minutes left.
Okay, so let me speed this up. So without even going into all this, so speed to market, for instance, is dependent on physical infrastructure, and that is common to everybody. So what stands you out, as someone who is expanding internationally. So infrastructure depends on, speed to market depends on the infrastructure available in those countries. Price, for instance, is not really the determinant. You can offer a better or lower price. Price elasticity, from what we hear within the same category, is usually not more than 7%. Otherwise, you price yourself out of the market. And your price is obviously dependent on your cost of production, which again, if you are producing from the same place, is not going to vary by much because you're all sourcing from the same place. Regulation comes into place, by all determinants. You all need to comply with regulations in the particular country. So if you're complying with regulations, it's not likely to stand you apart. So the answer is number 4, which is quality. That is what gives you your competitive edge when you are expanding into a region. So if you have to, if you have, crossed the barrier of ensuring that you're dealing with all the infrastructural challenges, you got your goods produced at the best price possible, you're meeting all the legal and regulatory requirements, then why do I, what happens, in the second moment of truth is I can experience your quality. So we talk about good standards, ensuring that, your products can get into the market and people would, choose your products on the shelf. And again, there's the opportunity for repurchase as well. So it's important that you ensure that, when you are thinking of exporting or expanding your goods and services, you have the edge on quality because of these many reasons: avoiding recall, avoiding rework, avoiding the issues with regulatory authorities, making sure that you do not create any offense when it comes to the culture in any particular country. I would skip here for questions and then go into business ethics. Remember at the beginning, I said that your reputation is your biggest currency. Warren Buffett said that it takes 20 years to build a reputation and you can tear it down literally in 5 minutes. And we've seen many examples. We believe in being a force for good and a force for good. And what that really means is we believe that doing business, making money doesn't mean that we need to forget our ethics or, it doesn't necessarily have to be done in a way that is painful to either your community or your environment. So we believe in doing business by doing good and also upholding our standards over many years. P&G has existed for almost 200 years. And one of the things that has actually kept us going is what we call our purpose, values, and principles, our PVPs. And we tolerate almost anything in P&G for as long as it doesn't touch on our ethics and our PVPs. So we're very, very strict on that, no matter where we are in the world. Now, why is reputation important? You will hear a lot of CEOs today talk about corporate reputation not now being an if, it's now a part of business strategy because your business has, the world has changed. You've heard about the VUCA world. There's a lot more distrust, between the consumer and the producer. There's a lot more distrust of governments and institutions as well as regulators. There is access to information like never before. In fact, sometimes you don't even know what direction to look at. With the internet now, there's so much information out there. It's very difficult to pull the wool over people's eyes. Our audience have changed. There is a difference between consumer needs. When you talk about Gen X, Y, Z, and millennials, again, even the way we approach issues also has changed. So reputation is very important. The consumers of today are not only interested in having a quality product, they're also interested in understanding the company behind the product. What are the company's values? What are the company's social investments? What does the company believe? What does the company support? Are you, responsible? Are you also responsible to our environment? So those are important. And if nothing has taught you about why reputation is important, I think COVID-19 has taught us all a very big lesson. A lot of things has changed. The way we do business will change. The way we talk to each other has changed. I mean, we'd have this program in person normally. Today we're having it online and with access to anybody and millions of people from any part of the world. So these are some of the considerations that we need to look at. Now, just to share an example of why this is important, you may have also heard about, there are many of these cases that are bound up, but sharing one which happened in 2008 with Siemens, where they were fined for charges for being guilty of, contravening the FCPA laws. It was huge, $800 million to US regulators, as well as $800 million to the Munich prosecutor. But what had then happened is Siemens was able to rebuild that reputation and the company following the issue that happened in 2008. But it's a lot of resources, and it's a lot of rework, and it's a lot of rebuilding that needs to happen. And in that gap, you've lost something. You lost market share, you lost reputation as well. So it's best to actually avoid situations that can actually impact your credibility in the marketplace. Again, as you said, business is changing today. Executives are no longer looking at the bottom line. There are many qualities now that are expected of executives, including yourselves: honesty, integrity, promise keeping. Whatever you say it is should be what it is. Whatever you say your product is going to deliver is what it should be seen to deliver. So we're moving away from traditional, roles of leadership to one that is more empathetic and one that is more transparent. So these are some of the things that are changing in the world today, and why ethics is very important. And as I wrap up this session, I also just want to reiterate to you that, while going global or expanding your business might sound intimidating or risky, life in itself is a risk. But then there are many benefits. If you ask a number of businesses that have gone beyond their domestic markets, there are many benefits to it, including, obviously increasing your sales, your ability to earn in foreign exchange, increasing your customer base, building your image globally, building your reputation, spreading that reputation beyond your own shores as well. Also enabling you to utilize your comparative advantage. I did talk earlier about the comparative advantage of one country versus the other. So if you do your studies and you find what are those primary things that are best sourced in your own region, or that has an advantage over the other region, then you have an advantage to be able to export that particular good or service into neighboring countries and make lots of revenue from it. Economies of scale is an obvious advantage for us as P&G. Is one of the things that we look at. How can we leverage the ACFTA, for instance, if we have a plant where we then utilize the comparative advantage of that particular country to produce a certain category, which we can then deliver at the best value across multiple countries across Africa. Same thing for a small business. If you find your niche area in your own particular country, then you do your research and you find out where this is most needed in other countries. But because you have that advantage, because that particular skill or material is best sourced out of your country, you can utilize that advantage by expanding regionally with the specific special goods or services that you can provide. Improving competitiveness, helping us to improve standards is also another very obvious one. There's a lot of technology transfer as we expand across different countries. Helps us to also be better culturally integrated across our different countries as well as continents. And also, obviously, maintaining high standards, international best practices, exchange of ideas between regions as well as countries can only actually help us improve and offer better value on our products. I keep using the example of P&G. P&G started as an SME way almost 200 years ago in Cincinnati. They were just two brothers-in-laws who went into business making soap and making candles. And then they have expanded through different continents. We exist in all the continents across the world today. So if we started as an SME, there is actually no reason why any other small business that is developing today, ensuring that you do your homework and you have high standards. I keep insisting high standards and ethics are very important. We don't compromise on this at all. There's no reason why you cannot be the next conglomerate. And there are lots of examples also in Africa of countries, of companies that started their business, in their bedroom. And today they have presence in 20, 30 countries across the region. So I hope, it's a quick one, but I hope that I've been able to share with you the concepts of international trade, why going global can be beneficial, what tools you have access to, and we can, through WeConnect, also share with you updates on the ACFTA as it becomes executioner. So I want to stop here and say a very big thank you for your time and for listening today. If you do have any questions, I'd be able to.
Thanks, Temi. That's amazing. We do have a bit of time for any more questions that may have come in, Mikhail.
There were no additional questions that came in since the last ones were touched on.
I can see that Tembeka's got her hand up. I'm not sure if she typed it out. Tembeka, was there a question that we didn't cover?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jean, for the beautiful webinar I just attended. I'm in broadcasting, and we will be obviously we're going to be setting up a factory in Cape Town. But what you've just said pertaining to where you set up your factory is very important. I would like you to actually help us because we'll also be servicing the SADC region. Would I be able to contact you because you were talking about free trade? Is there a free trade sector place in Cape Town? That's what I wanted to know. Hello?
Temi, you're on mute.
Oh, am I on mute?
No, Tembeka, we heard you, but I think Temi is responding and she's on mute. Temi, go ahead.
Okay. Yes. So there are government offices in Cape Town that can provide you with the information. I know that DTI does have an office there where they can provide you this information. There's also within DTI a section that focuses on regional integration or regional trade. So they have all the information, whether you're expanding into SADC or into other countries outside of SADC, you know, how to go about it, what kind of documentation you need, how you need to apply, and what applies. But yes, through We Connect, if there's any information that we can help you with, I'll be more than happy to do that.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I really appreciate it. It's a beautiful, it's a wonderful presentation that has come at the right time for our entity. I really appreciate it. Thank you and well done.
Thank you very much, Thembi. So if there are any other questions?
Great. I don't think we've got any more questions. I'm sure there's people who want to ask questions. We did have one about the exclusion list, and I think you tried to cover that. We, as We Connect, will be really keeping an eye out for the African Continental Trade Area agreements, exclusion lists, and how that's all going to span out. So we've got some potential speakers that we can bring in, but we're also very conscious that there are a lot of organizations are having talks and webinars on this. So we want the dust to settle and then be able to put a webinar together that addresses some of the key areas for small business owners or middle-sized business owners and how we take advantage of this big opportunity. We are very aware that this is a $3.4 trillion opportunity, and we want to make sure that women get some of that $1 trillion. We don't want just $1 trillion. We want a lot of the $1 trillion into women-owned hands. So we thank Procter & Gamble for all your support going forward. So this is the 5th of the 5 webinars that we'd agreed for this year. We're very grateful to the team. We've had amazing webinars, and we started out with purchasing, and then we went to human resources, then sales strategies, then marketing, and now ending on government relations and trade. So it's been very, very informative. The P&G team have come out to share their experience, expertise, and we've really valued that. We are going to get the recordings and we'll put them on the We Connect YouTube channel. We're also going to send you all the feedback form. We'd appreciate your feedback on this. And all I can say is, Sister Tope, this is amazing. Again, a lot of information there. We need to go back through your slides and really take it all in. We appreciate the time that you take to share your knowledge with us, and we will keep you informed on information gaps where we may need your help to in the future. I can see Mo's also put her hand up. I'll give you literally a second, Mo. What was the question you wanted to ask?
Yes, I had actually put it in the chat, but I think it just at the end there. It's just a question on if you want to expand into international markets, but you're not an import-export expert, would you then recommend that we actually get a consultant who can consult and give us advice, especially around the regulatory stuff and so forth? Or is it something that you can sort of DIY and just do it yourself with research online, particularly if you're a small business that's a bit cash-strapped? Thanks.
Very good question, Mo. We highly recommend that you get help in areas where you do not have the expertise. Like I mentioned during the training, sometimes what you read and the actual interpretation and the intent sometimes can differ. So yes, I do highly recommend getting an expert. Another thing that I didn't mention is you might also want to expand into countries where you don't speak the language. So you get an interpreter, for instance. I've done that a few times as well. So there's always resources that you can use to ensure that you have a soft landing.
Great, thank you for that. And Mo, I know DTII helping people to interpret and understand. So we'll try and get some webinars on that side too. I know some of you want to ask now questions, but let me just close off the webinar. And then if Sister Tope has a second to carry on with maybe 1 or 2 questions, we can do that. So on my side, I just want to close this by saying thank you, Mikal, and all of the Procter & Gamble team that have worked with us on this. We truly appreciate the time that you put into this. Yesterday, we started module 1 of the 4 modules for women in business that we're running this year. And again, your CEO came out and spent 2.5 hours talking directly to our women business owners, and he'd taken the time to read their business profiles and comment on them. And there aren't many places where you can get that kind of interaction with people on your level. So we again thank you. I'm going to close off the webinar, and then Mikal, I hand back to you for, I can't remember who was trying to ask a last question.